When the police stopped and humiliated a black school bus driver in front of the students, they thought no one would object. But the kids did something no one expected. Their brave action set off a chain reaction from which there was no escape. What happened next turned everything upside down. Early in the morning, sunlight softly filtered through the curtains of Nicholas Jackson's home, casting the first rays into the living room. The entire neighborhood was still quiet in the stillness of a new day. Nicholas, a former soldier accustomed to early mornings, moved quietly around the house to avoid waking his wife, Alice, who was still sound asleep upstairs. His years in the military had instilled in him a disciplined routine, and even now, having transitioned to a job as a school bus driver, Nicholas maintained that same disciplined demeanor. He faced each day with calm, thoroughness, and readiness, even though his current battlefield was simply the busy city streets. Standing in the kitchen, Nicholas prepared a pot of hot coffee. The warm aroma filled the space, bringing him a rare sense of comfort and relaxation amidst the regular routines of daily life. He expected today to be an ordinary day, nothing more than picking up the students, driving them to school, and making sure they all got home safely. It had been 15 years since he began this job, and with each passing year, he found himself more deeply connected to it. For Nicholas, driving a bus was more than just a job. It was a way to help the children in his community, many of whom came from difficult backgrounds, where opportunities were scarce. To him, driving the bus was a way to provide the kids with a little peace, a sense of temporary safety every time they boarded, in a place where they could be themselves, even if only on the short ride to school. In Nicholas's mind, each student on the bus was more than just a passenger. He knew each of them, their family situations, their dreams, and their struggles. One of the most memorable was Cameron, a resilient boy from a challenging family background. Cameron dreamed of becoming a professional basketball player, but life had not made it easy for him. For Nicholas, Cameron was a reminder of the challenges he had faced in the past, and he always tried to offer Cameron a sense of joy and safety on the bus, a place where the pressures of the outside world couldn't touch him. He took a sip of his coffee, letting his thoughts drift to his son Jordan, who was now a sophomore at a prestigious university. A proud smile briefly crossed Nicholas's face. Jordan was the first in his family to attend college, and every sacrifice and every effort Nicholas had made over the years was directed toward that goal. Every paycheck from his bus driving job, every hour behind the wheel, had been part of laying a foundation for his son's future. He knew he couldn't provide Jordan with a life of luxury, but he was determined to give him the best opportunities for success. As he finished his coffee, Nicholas glanced at the clock on the wall. It was time to start his day. He slung his jacket over his shoulder, left the house with a light step, and gently closed the door behind him. The fresh morning air greeted him, and he took a deep breath, feeling the crisp chill of the early mist as he made his way to the bus yard. The familiar yellow buses lined up, awaiting the drivers to arrive and prepare for the day's journey. The yard slowly came to life with the sound of engines starting and the laughter and chatter of his colleagues. Nicholas greeted each person, exchanging a few words before heading to his bus, feeling a special camaraderie with everyone there, those who understood the responsibilities and challenges each bus driver faced. Approaching his bus, Nicholas habitually did a careful inspection, checking it from front to back. This was a routine he had developed over his years on the job, a simple act that allowed him to feel in control, ensuring that everything was safe and ready for the children. After finishing his checks, he stepped onto the bus, started the engine, and listened to the steady hum of the motor. To Nicholas, that sound was like the heartbeat of an old friend, giving him peace of mind and a sense of familiarity. As the bus rolled out of the yard, Nicholas was ready to begin a new workday, a day he knew would not just involve the routes, but also moments where he could make a difference in the lives of the kids on board. On the familiar road, he began picking up each student. The bus quickly filled with laughter, conversation, and sometimes even bickering. The atmosphere on the bus was always lively, and that was exactly what Nicholas wanted. He had memorized each child's name and knew their family backgrounds, circumstances, and dreams. There was Cameron, the future basketball star, always dribbling an imaginary ball in the aisle. Lila, the quiet girl who always sat at the front, absorbed in her book. And Peter, the class clown, who could make everyone laugh, even at the most inopportune moments. Each child carried their challenges, and Nicholas knew that. That's why he turned the bus into a safe place, free from the pressures of the outside world, where the kids could be themselves, even if just for a brief time on their way to school. That day seemed no different. As he picked up the last group of students, the familiar sounds of playful banter filled the bus. Nicholas smiled as he overheard snippets of their conversation. "Have you seen the new game that came out?" Cameron asked Peter from the back of the bus. "I've been saving up for it. They say it's amazing," Peter replied with a wide grin. Nicholas shook his head, amused. Though he didn't fully understand the way they talked to each other, he was happy to see them excited about the little things. The bus rolled through the quiet streets, just minutes away from the school. The students were now in their familiar states, some chatting, others with headphones on, and a few even dozing off. Nicholas thought about his weekend plans, hoping he could visit Jordan at college, maybe catch a basketball game, or just have dinner together. It had been months since he last saw his son, and he was looking forward to it. As his mind drifted back to memories with Jordan, a sudden flash of red and blue lights appeared in the rearview mirror, followed by a loud siren, shattering the cheerful atmosphere on the bus. Nicholas immediately sensed the shift. The students' laughter faded into silence as they fell into a quiet curiosity, mixed with a hint of anxiety, all eyes turning toward the front of the bus. Nicholas pulled over to the side of the road, feeling a vague sense of unease. He had been driving students for 15 years without any serious issues or rule violations. Nonetheless, he knew he had to remain calm. Looking in the mirror, he saw the younger students pressing themselves against their seats, while the older ones, like Cameron, sat up straight, keeping their eyes fixed on what was happening. "What's going on, Mr. Jackson?" asked Lila, the girl who always had a book in her hands, from the front row. Nicholas tried to keep his voice steady to reassure the kids. "I'm not sure, but everyone stays calm. Everything's going to be okay." Rolling down the window, Nicholas saw two white officers approaching, both with stern expressions Nicholas knew all too well. A sense of foreboding rose within him. This was not his first time being pulled over by the police. He could feel what was coming just by the tense way they approached the bus. A tall, serious-faced officer stepped up and knocked hard on the window. His cold, sharp gaze made Nicholas slightly uneasy, but he did his best to appear friendly and polite. "License and registration," the officer demanded in a stiff, unsympathetic tone. Nicholas nodded, calmly retrieving his documents from his wallet and handing them over. While the first officer examined them, the second officer, shorter with a thick mustache, moved closer to the bus door, staring intently at the students inside. The kids' worried glances shifted back to Nicholas, and he could sense that they were beginning to feel afraid. "Step out of the vehicle," the tall officer suddenly ordered, his tone icy and unyielding. Nicholas blinked, slightly puzzled but still trying to remain calm. He didn't want to scare the students and also didn't want to appear defiant. He gently asked, "Could you tell me why, officer?" "Step out of the vehicle," the officer repeated, this time with a hint of impatience in his hard gaze. A mix of shame and tension rose within Nicholas, but he had no choice but to comply. He unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the door, and stepped outside. He didn't want the kids to see him in this situation, but he couldn't stop their worried, curious stares. "Place your hands on the hood," the officer commanded in a cold voice. Nicholas complied, feeling a turmoil of emotions. This was not a routine request. A deep sense of unease gripped him as he wondered whether he was being singled out simply because of his skin color. He tried not to dwell on that thought, but the officer standing rigidly behind him with a suspicious gaze made it hard not to wonder. Inside the bus, the students began murmuring among themselves. Cameron, the basketball-loving student Nicholas always looked out for, whispered to the friend next to him, "Mr. Jackson didn't do anything wrong. Why are they treating him like that?" Cameron's voice was laced with anger and frustration, and several other students nearby nodded in agreement, starting to feel the same resentment. The whispers grew louder, spreading from seat to seat. Nicholas stood still, hands on the hood, acutely aware of the injustice surrounding him. He knew he had to remain silent, not resist, but inside he felt a growing sense of frustration, as if his dignity was being tested in front of the very children he saw as his own. The second officer approached, casting a scrutinizing look at him. "Are you sure you're authorized to drive this bus?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm, eyeing Nicholas from head to toe as though questioning all the paperwork. Nicholas swallowed the anger rising in his throat, responding calmly. All my documents are in order. The officer smirked, barely glancing at the paperwork, then sneered. We've seen plenty of fake licenses. The students' murmurs grew louder, this time more audible. Mr. Jackson didn't do anything wrong? Cameron's voice rose confidently, and other students began echoing in agreement. Hearing the students, Nicholas knew he needed to stay calm to avoid worrying them more. He turned his head slightly and gently said, Cameron, everyone stay seated. Don't worry. I'll handle this. But the tall officer quickly turned toward Cameron, his eyes cold. He strode to the bus door, flung it open, and looked at the students with a stern expression. Everyone stay seated and no one moves, he barked, his gaze ice as he scanned the kids. In that tense atmosphere, Cameron refused to lower his phone, holding it up as a silent declaration that he would record everything. When the officer demanded he stop filming, Cameron replied calmly, I have the right to record. I'm protecting Mr. Jackson. Hearing Cameron's response, Nicholas felt a mix of pride and worry rising within him. He looked at the officer and said in a firm voice, They're just kids. Don't make them afraid. The officer shot Nicholas a frustrated look and replied, If all the paperwork checks out, this won't take long, but I need to make sure who you are and what you're doing. Nicholas sighed, his voice steady but filled with resolve. Everything's in order, and you know that. The second officer, the one with the mustache, walked around the bus and crossed his arms. That may be, but there are procedures, and we have to follow them. Nicholas now understood that this wasn't about procedure. It was about power. They had the authority, and they wanted to ensure Nicholas and everyone else, especially the kids on the bus, understood that. Inside, fear spread quickly among the students. Lila, the usually quiet girl, clutched her book tightly to her chest, her face pale, and asked the friend beside her, Do you think they'll take him away? Cameron leaned into the aisle, his tone firm. No way. They're just trying to scare him. Peter, the class clown, wasn't joking this time. They're not just scaring him, they're threatening us all. Nicholas heard the students' whispers through the open bus door and felt something break inside. The kids didn't deserve to witness this. They didn't deserve to see him being treated like a criminal just because of his skin color. The officer stepped back and then turned to his colleague. I think we need to take him in for further questioning, just to be sure. Nicholas's heart sank. You can't do that, he said calmly. I'm responsible for these students, and their parents are expecting them at school. You can't just take me away. The officer with the mustache shrugged. We'll find another driver. As for you, come with us. Meanwhile, Nicholas looked back through the bus window, catching Cameron's gaze, the student he always saw as a younger brother. Cameron's eyes were intense, filled with anger, as if he couldn't accept the injustice his beloved Mr. Jackson was enduring. With a determined resolve, Cameron had pulled his phone out of his pocket, opened the video recording app, and began filming the entire incident. His actions were not just about recording. They were a powerful statement that he would not back down in the face of injustice. His eyes were filled with determination, reflecting both his anger and loyalty to the teacher who had always stood up for him. A few other students on the bus began taking out their phones, following Cameron's lead, and with each phone that lit up, their solidarity grew stronger. Lila, the quiet girl in the front row, slowly pulled out her phone to record, her hands shaking slightly, but her gaze was steady. Mr. Nicholas has always protected us. Today, it's our turn to protect him, Lila said, her voice soft yet filled with resolve. The tall officer who had ordered Nicholas out of the vehicle quickly noticed the student's actions. He turned back, his voice laced with anger. Stop that right now. No one is allowed to record here. His eyes glared at each student in turn as if to intimidate them. His lips pressed tightly as though ready to act if anyone dared defy him. But Cameron stood his ground, looking directly into the officer's eyes, his phone held firmly in his hand. We have the right to record, Cameron responded, his voice calm yet firm. We want to protect Mr. Jackson. He hasn't done anything wrong, and we're not going to let this happen without proof. Cameron's words spread like wildfire, igniting courage in each student on the bus. A wave of indignation rippled through them, and every eye turned toward the officer, each one carrying a silent challenge. One by one, they held their phones steady, not a single one showing fear. Every student carried a silent fury, a determination not to let this injustice pass without someone speaking up. Nicholas looked back and caught Cameron in Lila's eyes. His heart sank, feeling both deeply moved and concerned. He didn't want the students to witness this, but now he realized that the values he had always tried to instill, fairness and courage, had taken root in each of them. The children he had always protected were now ready to stand up for him in the very moment he felt weakest. "Cameron, Lila, you don't have to do this. I can handle it," Nicholas said, his voice steady, though he couldn't hide the emotion welling up inside him. Cameron shook his head, his voice resolute and unwavering. "No, Mr. Jackson, you've always protected us, and now it's our turn to protect you." The shorter officer with the thick mustache wouldn't back down either. He stepped up to the bus door, glaring at each student, his voice dripping with authority. "Put those phones down now. None of you are allowed to film." His voice was filled with anger, and his eyes flashed a warning that there would be consequences if anyone disobeyed. But no one moved. The students sat firm, clutching their phones tightly, continuing to record every moment. The determination of these young people created an unbreakable wall that the officer couldn't shake. The younger students looked anxious, but seeing Cameron and Lila continue filming, they regained their composure, even showing newfound courage and resilience. Cameron looked at the officer, his gaze unwavering. "We're not doing anything wrong. This is Mr. Jackson, our teacher, and we're going to protect him," he declared, his voice strong and clear in the tense silence. Cameron's firmness and courage seemed to shock the two officers. They looked at each other, clearly unsettled, as if unable to believe that a group of students could show such unity and resolve. Though they held the power, they were beginning to realize that the students' steadfast determination had taken control of the situation. Nicholas felt an indescribable pride and gratitude swell within him. He had never thought that the kids he drove every day could be this courageous and steadfast. He realized that somehow, his years of dedication and protection had planted seeds of loyalty and bravery in each of his students. Standing beside the bus, Nicholas struggled to hold back tears, but his heart was filled with joy and gratitude. Finally, one officer sighed, "Let's stop this before things get out of hand." Nicholas breathed a sigh of relief, feeling both a sense of release and ongoing tension. He knew the situation had escalated beyond control, but at least the students on the bus were safe. The two officers exchanged a quick, whispered conversation that Nicholas couldn't hear. A moment later, the officer turned back, speaking reluctantly. "All right, you're free to go, but keep an eye out. We'll be watching." The officer's words hung in the air, a finality that also admitted defeat in the face of the students' united strength. At that moment, on the small bus, the students had accomplished something extraordinary. They had protected the person they respected and sent a message that true strength lay not just in authority, but in courage and unity. Nicholas looked at the students once more, meeting their proud and unshakable expressions. He felt as if he was no longer standing alone. The children he had protected were now ready to stand by him in his hardest moments. Though his heart still throbbed with emotion and gratitude, he knew he would never forget this moment. The moment his students and his family showed him that even in the darkest times, the light of loyalty and justice would shine through. As the officers left, Nicholas slowly returned to the bus, his body heavy with the strain of tension. The students looked at him with wide eyes. "Are you all right, Mr. Jackson?" Cameron asked softly from the back. Nicholas tried to smile, though it came off stiff and forced. "Yes, I'm all right, kids," he replied, though he knew inside he wasn't quite all right. This wasn't the first time he'd faced this, and it likely wouldn't be the last. What hurt the most was that the kids had to witness it all, to see him treated this way simply because of his skin color. He started the bus, feeling the engine rumble under his feet, a reminder to keep going. "All right, let's get to school," he said, trying to keep his voice as normal as possible. But inside, he knew everything had changed. As he drove toward the school, Nicholas knew in his heart that this wasn't over. It wasn't just a routine traffic stop. Nicholas steered the bus into the school parking lot, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. The students filed off the bus one by one, the unusual silence stark in contrast to the usual noisy goodbyes. Cameron gave Nicholas a respectful nod before stepping on, still holding his phone. Nicholas forced a smile back, but deep down, he felt like he was on the verge of breaking. Entering the driver's break room, he felt the weight of the recent incident pressing down on his shoulders. This wasn't just another police stop. This time, the kids had witnessed it all, feeling every moment of the injustice and heartache. He knew that moments like this would leave marks on their minds, shaping their fears and understanding of the world around them. He sat down at an old table in the break room, holding an unopened water bottle. His phone buzzed continuously in his pocket as messages poured in. At first, Nicholas thought it might be from his wife, Alice, or his son, Jordan. But as he opened his phone, he was stunned by the flood of messages and notifications. Is this real? A message accompanied by a link that Nicholas clicked. He stared at the screen, his heart skipping a beat as he saw the thumbnail of the video. The officer yelling, Nicholas standing with his hands on the bus's hood, and Cameron filming from the aisle. The video Cameron recorded was shared on social media, sparking an immediate, intense reaction. Within a few hours, it had attracted tens of thousands of views and thousands of comments expressing outrage. The image of Nicholas, standing silently by the hood of his bus with his hands pressed against it, a symbol of resilience rather than submission, moved many viewers. Under the flashing lights of the police cars, the determined gaze of the students on the bus, especially Cameron, made it clear to everyone watching just how powerful and courageous these young people were in standing up against injustice. The parents of the students on the bus quickly found out, and a wave of anger and sadness swept through the community. Messages and calls poured in, conveying gratitude, support, and a collective demand for justice for Nicholas. Many parents wanted to organize a large protest right outside the school where Nicholas worked, where he had safely transported their children for years. They wanted to come together to show their solidarity and support for the bus driver they had trusted with their children's safety for so long. Among them were mothers and fathers who had known Nicholas since his early days on the job. To them, he wasn't just someone who drove their kids. He was someone who had cared for, protected, and built a sense of security for the students every time they boarded the bus. The prevailing sentiment was anger and disappointment at seeing a person like Nicholas treated unjustly, even regarded as a criminal simply because of his skin color. To these parents, this wasn't just an insult to Nicholas. It was an affront to everyone in the community, especially those who had placed their trust in him. One mother, named Maria, tearfully told a reporter on television, "Nicholas has always treated the kids as if they were his own. Every time I sent my daughter on that bus, I felt at peace, knowing Nicholas would look after her. But today, I can't hold back my tears, thinking about what he had to endure in front of our children." At Nicholas's home, his wife Alice watched Cameron's video with a mixture of worry and shock. The events hadn't just shaken the community, they had deeply affected Alice and their family. Since the video went viral, Alice's phone hadn't stopped ringing with calls from friends and family offering support and expressing their anger over what Nicholas, a man known for his kindness and sense of responsibility, had been subjected to. Alice called Nicholas, feeling a surge of pride for her husband. Her voice trembled with emotion as she said, "You did the right thing, Nicholas." Her tone was gentle but filled with emotion. "You've always been strong and righteous. Today, you're not only the husband I respect, but also the father our children will always be proud of." Alice's words of encouragement moved Nicholas, giving him strength as he felt the unwavering support of his wife. He nodded, knowing that no matter what challenges lay ahead, he had a partner who would never abandon him. Nicholas's phone rang again, this time with a video call from his son, Jordan, who was away at college. When he saw his son's face on the screen, he noticed Jordan's eyes were filled with tears, a mix of anger and emotion. Since seeing the video online, Jordan had been unable to contain his anger over how his father was treated, and he wanted to speak to him directly. "Dad, I saw the video," Jordan said, his voice shaking with emotion. "You have no idea. Everyone at school is talking about it, and they all support you. I'm so proud of you, Dad. You didn't let them push you around, and you're not alone in this." Hearing his son's words, Nicholas felt a powerful wave of pride and happiness. He had never wanted Jordan to witness the kind of injustice he had endured, but at the same time, Jordan's understanding and support made him feel comforted. Nicholas looked into his son's determined eyes and silently promised never to give up, knowing that his resilience would be a lesson not just for himself, but also a model for Jordan to follow. Amid the waves of support from his family and community, Nicholas began to feel a sense of relief and renewed strength. The worry and stress he'd carried from that morning's ordeal started to fade as he saw the unity of those around him. It was this love and solidarity that gave him the strength to keep going in his pursuit of justice for himself and the community. On social media, the hashtags #JusticeFor Nicholas and Protect Our Driver began trending, capturing the attention of hundreds of thousands across the country. Posts, shares, and comments from students, parents, and people who had never met Nicholas all voiced a demand for justice. Many shared their own stories of facing discrimination and injustice, expressing anger over what Nicholas had experienced. Just as Nicholas was trying to steady himself in the face of it all, a call from the school principal surprised him. "Nicholas, the parents are calling. They've seen the video." "Yes, I assumed they would," Nicholas replied, trying to keep his voice calm despite his inner anxiety. "The parents are furious," the principal continued. "They want answers, and some are on their way to the school." Nicholas rubbed his hand over his face as if to brush away all the tension. "What do you need me to do?" "Please come to the main office. They want to speak with you directly." When Nicholas arrived at the main office, a few parents were already waiting. Some were pacing, others sat with their arms crossed, their expressions tense. When they saw him, a few parents approached him gratefully, thanking him for keeping calm and protecting the children. "We're so grateful to you, Mr. Jackson," one mother said, holding his hand tightly. "My son told me everything. Thank you for standing up for them." Nicholas responded, his voice thick with emotion, though not every parent was as calm. An angry father approached, waving his phone in front of Nicholas. "How do you explain my kid having to sit and watch this? Do you think this is okay?" Before Nicholas could respond, another parent stepped in, speaking loudly. "Wait a minute, this isn't his fault. You all saw the video. They targeted him for no reason." An argument broke out, parents raising their voices and debating heatedly until the principal stepped in, raising his hand to call for silence. "Please, let's stay calm," he said. "We're all on the same side here. We need to focus on what matters most, which is making sure this never happens again." Outside, a protest had already begun. A small crowd gathered in front of the police station, holding signs that read, "Fire these officers and justice for Nicholas." News vans lined the street, and reporters jockeyed for a spot to capture the action. Cameron, the student who refused to stay silent, had joined the protest. He held up a handmade sign that read, "Our driver, our hero." A local reporter approached to interview him, and he didn't hesitate, saying, "Mr. Jackson cares about us. He doesn't deserve to be treated like this. None of us should have had to witness this." The day passed in tension, and as the sun set, the protest in front of the police station grew louder. More parents and students joined, standing together to demand justice for Nicholas. The police chief eventually released a short statement, promising that the actions of the involved officers would be reviewed. But that wasn't enough to calm the crowd, who demanded true accountability, not empty promises. That evening, Nicholas sat on the edge of his bed, weighed down by exhaustion. The entire day felt shrouded in a heavy, uncomfortable fog. He understood that this was about more than just him. It was about all the children on that bus, about everyone who had faced unwarranted suspicion. His phone buzzed one last time for the day. It was a message from Cameron. "You always taught us to stand up for what's right. I'm just following your example, Mr. Jackson." Nicholas exhaled slowly, feeling the heaviness in his chest lift slightly. For the first time that day, he allowed himself a small smile. The fight wasn't over, but at least he knew he wasn't alone. The next morning, Nicholas woke up to his phone beside him, continuously buzzing with messages. News had spread everywhere, and he received a flood of supportive messages from all over. From journalists wanting interviews, parents sending words of encouragement, and activists inviting him to join their movement. He felt the weight of everything even before his feet touched the ground. Alice stood at the door, her face filled with concern, and she said, "Nicholas, you should watch the news." He slowly sat up, rubbed his eyes, and Alice handed him her phone, its screen live streaming from a local TV station. Throughout the night, protests outside the police station intensified as people demanded justice for Nicholas Jackson, the bus driver humiliated by the police in front of his students, the reporter announced. "The police have issued a statement saying the officers involved have been suspended pending investigation, but the public is demanding immediate termination." Nicholas handed the phone back, sighing. "They're just trying to protect themselves," he muttered. Alice sat beside him. placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. They know they were wrong, but they're too afraid to admit it. Nicholas nodded slowly, feeling a mix of exhaustion and unease. The situation had grown beyond his control. It was no longer just a personal matter, but had now become a symbol of the injustice many face every day. That morning, the school principal called Nicholas. "I need you to come to the school," he said, his tone cautious. "There's something you should see." When Nicholas arrived at the school, he saw a crowd gathered outside. Parents, students, and other community members filled the schoolyard, holding signs and chanting for justice. The atmosphere was charged with energy and anger, but also carried a sense of hope. The principal met Nicholas at the entrance, signaling for him to follow him to the auditorium. "The kids wanted to do something for you," he said, pride evident in his voice. When Nicholas stepped into the auditorium, the sight before him left him speechless. The students he drove to and from school every day had organized a protest to support him. Cameron was also in the crowd, holding a sign that read, "Our teacher is a hero." He stood in the middle of the circle, his face full of determination, his eyes unwavering. A reporter approached Cameron, asking for an interview. When asked why he chose to film the incident and share the video, Cameron responded without hesitation. "Mr. Nicholas isn't just the driver who takes us to school every day. He's the one who makes us feel safe and who teaches us about courage and honesty. Yesterday, he was treated unfairly, and we won't just stand by and let that happen." Cameron's words spread across news outlets and social media, moving many and strengthening the resolve to support the fight for justice for Nicholas. Parents of the students, not only supporters but also grateful to Nicholas for the values he instilled in their children, felt a deep sense of appreciation. One parent approaching Nicholas, placing a hand on his shoulder and said, "You're the one we trust with our children. You've given them safety and courage. This community will always stand with you." The protest gradually drew the attention of major media outlets. Reporters and journalists from various television networks and local radio stations came to cover the event. They interviewed parents, students, and even activists. The community's outrage spread like a wave, turning this into more than just Nicholas's story, but a symbol of the fight against injustice in society. Under the mounting pressure from the community, the city police chief was forced to hold a press conference to address the incident. He promised that the police department would open an investigation into the officer's conduct and pledged measures to prevent such incidents in the future. However, many felt that the promise wasn't enough. They wanted concrete actions to bring justice to Nicholas and prevent discrimination within the system. That evening, as the protest continued, Alicia, along with Jordan, who had returned from school to join, stood beside Nicholas, watching the supportive crowd. In the flickering candlelight from the crowd, they looked at each other and held hands. Jordan spoke to his father, his voice full of pride. "Dad, it's not just me. This whole community stands with you. Today, everyone sees your strength and courage." Nicholas stayed silent, his heart swelling with gratitude and pride. He knew he was no longer alone. He had fought not just for himself, but for the community and the values he believed in. And that gave him a renewed sense of purpose and determination to fight for justice. That night, the protest continued under the glow of candlelight. The community gathered, hand in hand, and chants rang out incessantly. "Justice for Nicholas." The candles shone brightly in the night, a symbol of hope and the unbreakable strength of people standing up for what is right. Nicholas's story had become an inspiration, not only for those who had faced injustice, but also for those who sought to change this society. Under mounting pressure from the community and a wave of public outrage, the city's police chief was finally compelled to act. He decided to hold a press conference, publicly apologizing to Nicholas and his family. The press conference was held at the city police headquarters, a place that had hosted many official meetings and announcements before. But this time, the atmosphere was more tense and weighty than ever. Reporters and community members gathered in large numbers, surrounding the building and creating an oppressive sense of anticipation. Flashbulbs fired constantly, the sounds of cameras and murmurs filled the air, and the room fell silent, waiting for an explanation. A public act everyone had long been expecting. When the police chief stepped up to the podium, his face bore clear signs of fatigue and pressure. He knew he was facing a serious situation, one that could erode the community's trust in the police department he led. In a brief moment before he began, he took a deep breath, steadied himself, and looked directly at the crowd. Everyone's eyes were on him, waiting for an apology and a commitment to real change from the head of city security. "We are here today to take responsibility for an unfortunate incident," he began, his voice slightly shaky. "I apologize to Nicholas Jackson and his family, as well as to the community, for the harm this incident has caused." The public apology rang out, but it didn't fully ease the anger visible in many people's eyes. There were murmurs in the room as he continued. The actions of the two officers involved were not only wrong, but also completely misrepresentative of the values we strive to uphold. The police chief then announced the termination of the two officers responsible for the incident, a move that fueled the public's anger. He asserted that this step was essential not only to punish the wrongful actions of the officers, but also to underscore the department's commitment to comprehensive change and to prevent similar incidents in the future. "Dismissals are just the first step," he stated. "We will launch a thorough investigation to determine the root causes of this incident and review our procedures to identify and address any gaps that might lead to unfair treatment within our department." He emphasized that reform was no longer a choice, but an urgent requirement. "We will take necessary measures to ensure that law enforcement becomes fairer and more transparent. Our officers will be regularly trained and reminded of their responsibilities and professional ethics, as these are the foundations essential to building trust within the community." Concluding his speech, the police chief promised to personally oversee the reform process and ensure that each promise made today would be followed through as expected. Below, Nicholas stood among his family and friends. His feelings were mixed, a sense of relief that the police were finally being held accountable, but also a lingering pain from what he had endured. The memories of what happened remained vivid in his mind, and no apology could entirely erase those scars. Yet watching the police chief apologize publicly in front of the entire city, he felt this was a victory, a testament to the solidarity and resolve of the community. Thanks to the unwavering support of those around him, his voice had been heard and respected. Among those present were not only Nicholas's family and friends, but also many other parents. They came not only to support Nicholas, but also to protect their children and to demand a fair and safe environment for them. A young mother in the crowd, her eyes filled with determination, shared, "We want our children to grow up without fearing those who are supposed to protect them. This incident is a reminder that we cannot remain silent. We cannot ignore injustice." Another father attended the press conference, his eyes bright with anger and resolve. "We can't stand by while these mistakes continue. Today it's Nicholas. Tomorrow it could be my son or someone else's daughter. This is an issue for the whole community, and we will not stop fighting until we see real change," he said, his voice strong with determination. His words received widespread agreement from those around him, and applause echoed throughout the room. Outside, the crowd gathered early and waited patiently, listening to every word spoken inside through loudspeakers. Signs with slogans like "Justice for Nicholas," "We demand change," and "Protect our community" were held high, painting a picture of unity and determination. Although apologies had been spoken, it was evident that the community's trust in the police system had been deeply shaken. They wanted to see this commitment realized, not just hear empty promises. After the press conference ended, the police chief left the podium, his face showing clear signs of strain. He knew that this was just the beginning of a long journey ahead. The angry looks and muted applause from the crowd indicated that the words spoken today would mean nothing without real action. For Nicholas, as the press conference wrapped up and people began to disperse, he stood still for a moment, looking around. The support from the community had helped him hold firm, but he also knew that the incident had left lasting wounds. He felt a greater responsibility now, a desire for change not only for himself, but also for everyone who might face similar circumstances. The press conference was over, but its impact would endure. Parents left with a renewed sense of determination and hope for a safer environment for their children. The community, although they had heard the apology, maintained pressure on the police department to ensure the promised reforms would take place. And within everyone, perhaps, there began a newfound belief in the power of collective voices and the potential for change when everyone stands together. News of the apology and the dismissal of the two officers quickly spread through the community, bringing a sense of relief and comfort to those who had stood by Nicholas through the intense days that had just passed. The parents of students and community activists decided to organize a special appreciation event to honor Nicholas, a man they saw as a silent hero, a trusted protector of their children. On the day of the event, the schoolyard was packed. People came from all around to express their gratitude and respect for Nicholas. Large banners with messages like, "Thank you, Nicholas, our hero, and protect our community," were displayed everywhere. The vibrant colors of the signs, the lively conversations, laughter, and the radiant smiles of those gathered created a meaningful and festive atmosphere. As Nicholas entered the schoolyard, he was taken aback by the crowd that had gathered to show their support. He looked around, seeing parents with respectful gazes and students with joyful smiles. An overwhelming sense of emotion rose within him as he realized the depth of the community's affection for him. He had never imagined that a simple act, merely protecting his students, could generate such powerful support. When Nicholas stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted in cheers. Cameron, the brave student who had recorded the video that sparked the movement, stood at the front of the stage, holding a microphone and speaking with pride. "Mr. Nicholas has always protected us, always made sure we felt safe and reassured every time we boarded the bus. Today, we want to say thank you. He's not just our driver, he's our teacher, our hero." Applause filled the schoolyard as Cameron finished his speech. The crowd's faces radiated pride and respect for Nicholas. Then Lila came up on stage, holding a small gift for Mr. Nicholas, a drawing she had made herself. The drawing depicted the familiar yellow school bus with Nicholas at the wheel, surrounded by the smiling faces of his students. Lila gently handed the picture to Nicholas, her eyes shining with joy and deep gratitude. "Mr. Nicholas, this is how I see you, the person who always protects us, the one who's always there when we need you." Nicholas took the drawing, unable to hide his warm smile. He looked down at the familiar faces gazing up at him with admiration and love. These students were not merely passengers on the bus. They were people he felt a deep responsibility to protect and care for. After the students' speeches, a representative of the parents stepped onto the stage. A mother, holding the microphone with tears in her eyes, looked directly at Nicholas and said, "Nicholas, you are not just a driver. You've taught our children about courage, compassion, and perseverance. We are grateful for everything you have done for our kids, and we will forever cherish the values you have instilled in them." Her words brought many in the audience to tears. Applause once again resounded, and Nicholas could no longer hold back his emotions. He stepped up to the microphone, his voice slow and filled with emotion. "I never thought the work I do could mean so much. I just wanted to ensure my students were safe, and that they had a place to feel calm, even if it was just on the short ride to school. But today, I realize that it's you who have shown me the power of unity, the strength of courage. Thank you to the students, to all the parents, and to the community that has stood by me. This is a victory for all of us." After Nicholas's words, the crowd stood up as one, applauding and chanting his name. Some even began singing a song about courage and unity, making the atmosphere profoundly moving and meaningful. The students surrounded Nicholas, feeling the warmth and strength of a mentor who had never abandoned them, no matter the circumstances. At the end of the event, the community organized a small procession around the school grounds, carrying banners of appreciation and holding candles that flickered softly in the night. The march was not only a tribute, but also an opportunity for everyone to share their emotions and reflections on the values Nicholas had come to represent. Each step echoed the call for justice, a reminder that Nicholas was never alone. This was a moment for the community to unite, demonstrating compassion and love, the very ideals Nicholas had always hoped to spread. Leading the procession were the students and teachers, each carrying a candle. The candles glowed gently, symbols of hope and gratitude, spreading warmth and light throughout the gathering. These were not just physical flames, they embodied the fire in everyone's heart, reminding them of the lessons Nicholas had instilled: courage, responsibility, and unconditional love. In the soft candlelight, the atmosphere became serene yet profoundly moving, echoing the spirit of the evening. One by one, students, parents, and even strangers who had never met Nicholas felt inspired by the story of courage and love he exemplified. The stories shared about Nicholas seemed to infuse strength into every step of those participating. Many found themselves deeply moved as they heard memories of Nicholas and the kindness he had shown those around him. Some shared that, thanks to Nicholas, they had learned to live more meaningfully, to care for others, and to face life's challenges with bravery. The procession ended with a special moment when everyone raised their candles and stood in silence, honoring Nicholas. Together, the candles formed a sea of light, radiating warmth and hope. This moment was like a silent promise that Nicholas's spirit would live on in their hearts, motivating them to live better lives and build a more united, compassionate community. That night, as the family gathered in the familiar space of their small home, Nicholas still felt the echoes of the appreciation ceremony in every breath. Alice's eyes shone with happiness and pride as she looked at her husband and their young son Jordan, quietly leaning against his father's shoulder, his innocent eyes filled with trust. These moments brought their family closer than ever. Looking into Alice's eyes, Nicholas realized that he had not been alone in this journey. His family had endured these challenges alongside him. Alice had been more than a wife and partner. She had been his source of strength throughout the difficult days. There had been long, sleepless nights, silent tears, and heartfelt encouragement from Alice whenever he felt exhausted and tempted to give up. Now, sitting beside his wife and son, he felt a deep appreciation for his family, the strongest support he had on this tough road. Jordan, now a college student, had matured significantly since his younger days. Looking at his 20-something son, Nicholas felt proud that Jordan was not only the family's hope, but also a young man with a keen sense of justice and responsibility. From a young age, Jordan had witnessed his father's resilience and determination. The lessons from home had laid a solid ethical foundation within him. As he listened to stories of his father's struggle, Jordan didn't just listen. He absorbed the strength of the path Nicholas had walked. He wasn't shy about sharing his father's journey with friends and actively participated in social causes at his university. Every time he returned home, he spent time with his parents, listening and sharing as a true companion on their journey. With eyes shining with pride, he knew he was carrying forward the values his family had instilled, contributing to a better future for his community. Jordan's growth was not solely from academics, but from life experiences, from lessons of love and courage he had learned from his father. This had shaped him into a thoughtful, passionate young man, ready to follow in his father's footsteps, not just for personal success, but to spread the values his family had so carefully cultivated. Reflecting on the familiar faces of the community who attended the appreciation ceremony that evening, Nicholas felt a sense of peace. Neighbors and friends who lived and worked around him had shown unwavering support and solidarity. They came not only to celebrate, but also to remind him that his efforts had never been in vain. The hugs, firm handshakes, and hopeful gazes rekindled his faith in the future. At that moment, Nicholas understood that standing up for what is right is not only about bringing justice to oneself, but also about planting seeds of hope within the community. The gratitude and the smiles of those around him tonight created a spreading joy, a reminder that as they all move forward in their lives, they would carry with them the knowledge that they were not alone. He realized that sometimes a small but righteous act can inspire hope in countless others. In Nicholas's mind, he saw a stronger community, a place where people were ready to support each other through life's trials. The community was no longer just a group of strangers living alongside one another. It was a place bound by a shared purpose, justice and happiness. Thanks to people like Nicholas, the community had found a glimmer of hope, a belief that things would get better and that they deserved a life of peace and dignity. The last candlelight may have gone out, but in each person present that night, the flame of hope and compassion continued to burn. Nicholas was no longer just a father, husband, or simple bus driver. He had become a symbol of unity and resilience. In the quiet peace of the night, he held Alice's hand tightly and gently said, "We have everything we need: love, courage, and unity. We are never alone." These words were a reminder to the whole family that, no matter where life took them or what challenges lay ahead, they would always have each other to rely on. They weren't just a small family in a large community. They were part of a growing strength that was spreading among everyone. For Nicholas, each new day would be a fresh journey, but with family and community by his side, he knew he would never walk alone. The following morning, Nicholas prepared for work as usual, but today felt different. He felt a quiet joy and relief as he stepped into his familiar yellow school bus. The bus, with its scratches and well-worn seat, was no longer just a vehicle. It had become a symbol of resilience and courage. The events of the past few days had transformed his job into a mission. As Nicholas started the bus, the familiar rumble of the engine greeted him like an old friend. Every corner of the bus reminded him of memories with his students, the smiles, the jokes, and the conversations he always listened to with genuine care. After the recent struggles, he realized more than ever that he was not just a driver. He was a part of his students' lives, contributing to their growth and well-being. As he drove down familiar streets, the morning light cast a gentle glow on everything, making it all look fresh and hopeful. The houses, the rows of trees along the road, all felt familiar. Yet today they carried a different kind of beauty, a beauty of peace and hope. Nicholas understood that not everything had changed overnight, but he could feel the hope of the community and of the people who had stood by him. When he reached the first stop, Cameron was waiting, a bright smile on his face. "Ready for another ride, Mr. Nicholas?" Cameron asked as he climbed aboard, this time without a phone in hand, carrying only his unwavering trust. Nicholas chuckled, feeling a warmth in his heart he hadn't felt in a long time. "Always ready, kiddo. Let's go." One by one, other students got on, greeting him like an old friend, their eyes filled with joy and admiration. Each student expressed their respect and gratitude in their way, from Lila's radiant smile to Peter's quiet nod. Peter, the usual class clown, was notably more reserved today. Nicholas could see a new spark in each student, a newfound appreciation for justice and courage. As the bus continued down each street, Nicholas noticed a shift in the neighborhood as well. Some people smiled and waved as he drove by. An elderly woman even waited at the corner just to say thank you as the bus passed. Strangers, neighbors he had never spoken to before, now felt closer. This community had united behind him, supporting what he had done and what he stood for. This warmth filled him with deep comfort and pride. Inside the bus, the atmosphere was as lively as ever, but with a new sense of purpose. The students laughed, sharing stories about small happenings in their lives. But something had changed. They looked at Nicholas with eyes full of trust and admiration. To them, Nicholas was more than a bus driver. He was a symbol of courage and justice. He had become a role model, someone they knew would always protect and guide them, not just on the ride to school, but on their journey through life. When the bus slowly came to a stop in front of the school, each student stepped off, many of them turning back to smile at Nicholas. Lila, usually shy and reserved, turned and said quietly, "Thank you, Mr. Nicholas, for everything." Her simple words, filled with gratitude, warmed his heart. Nicholas nodded, smiling at her and all the other students. He watched as they walked into the school, their small figures disappearing into the crowd. But he knew he had left a mark on their lives, a mark of courage, resilience, and unconditional care. He realized that every action, every word he spoke, could shape how they saw the world. And now, more than ever, that was his motivation to continue his work with passion and responsibility. When the bus was finally empty, Nicholas sat in silence for a moment, looking out at the school grounds, reflecting on everything he had experienced. He was no longer just a bus driver. He had become part of a larger fight for justice, unity, and hope for the future. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, but he was ready to face them because he had a whole community standing behind him, ready to support him through any hardship. He understood now that his journey wasn't just about driving students from home to school. It was about becoming a source of encouragement and inspiration for them. He would continue to protect them, not only from the dangers on the road, but also by showing them that they could always stand up for what was right. His hope extended not only to himself, but to the younger generation, those he believed would continue the fight for justice and compassion. With this thought in mind, Nicholas started the engine and pulled out of the school grounds. His heart was full of trust that from this day forward, his journey would never be alone. He would always have his family, his community, and his students, those who would continue to inspire him and give him strength to carry on. The yellow bus rolled on through the familiar streets, carrying not only students, but also the hopes, courage, and unity of a closely knit community. Nicholas smiled, knowing he would always be a protector, a teacher, and a symbol of a fairer and brighter future for everyone. This story isn't just about injustice. It's a powerful reminder of the strength of unity and courage, even from the youngest among us. The students prove that each action, however small, can make a huge difference. If you were one of those who witnessed this story, what would you do to protect what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share this story, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new videos. Let's spread the change together. See you next time.
The evening sky was turning a deep purple as Judge Marcus Henderson gathered his papers from his mahogany desk. At 53 years old, he carried himself with the quiet dignity that came from 15 years of serving on the bench. His salt and pepper hair and warm brown eyes gave him a trustworthy appearance that put people at ease in his courtroom. It had been a particularly long Thursday at the courthouse. The case he'd been presiding over involved a complex drug trafficking operation, and the evidence portion had taken longer than expected. The wall clock showed 8:45 p.m., much later than his usual departure time of 6:30. Marcus stretched his tall frame and slipped his black judicial robe off his broad shoulders, carefully hanging it on the wooden coat rack near his chamber door. Underneath, he wore a crisp navy blue suit that his wife Sandra had helped him pick out last month. He smiled, thinking of how she always insisted he dress the part of a distinguished judge, even if his robe covered everything during court sessions. The courthouse halls were quiet now, their usual bustling energy replaced by the soft hum of cleaning equipment in the distance. Marcus nodded to Jim, the elderly night janitor who had been working there even longer than he had been a judge. "Good night, Your Honor." Jim called out with a friendly wave. "Don't work too hard now." Marcus chuckled, his deep voice echoing slightly in the empty corridor. "You're one to talk, Jim. Don't stay too late yourself." Their familiar exchange was part of his routine on late nights like this. Walking through the parking garage, his footsteps echoed against the concrete walls. Most of the spaces were empty now, save for a few cars belonging to other late workers. His black Mercedes S-Class sat in its reserved spot, the Judge M. Henderson nameplate reflecting the fluorescent lighting above. As he settled into the leather driver's seat, Marcus thought about the day's proceedings. The young defendant's face kept appearing in his mind, another black man caught up in the system. While Marcus always maintained strict impartiality in his rulings, he couldn't help but feel a deeper understanding of the complex social factors that often led young men down such paths. It was one of the reasons he had helped establish a youth mentorship program in the community 3 years ago. The car's engine purred to life, and the dashboard display illuminated with a text message from Sandra. "Dinner in the microwave. Love you." He smiled, appreciating how his wife of 28 years still looked after him, even with their children grown and out of the house. Marcus pulled out of the parking garage and onto the quiet downtown streets. The city looked different at this hour, peaceful, almost serene. Street lamps cast warm circles of light on the sidewalks, and the occasional late-night pedestrian hurried past closed storefronts. He turned onto Mason Avenue, taking his usual route home to the suburbs. The radio played softly in the background, a jazz station that helped him decompress after long days. Tonight it was Miles Davis, "Kind of Blue." The familiar melody helped ease the tension in his shoulders as he thought about tomorrow's docket. He had 3 sentencing hearings in the morning, and he wanted to review the case files one more time before making his decisions. At the intersection of Mason and 43rd Street, Marcus stopped at a red light. He noticed a police cruiser in his rearview mirror, a common sight in this part of town. He didn't think much of it. After all, he had worked alongside law enforcement for decades, first as a prosecutor and then as a judge. He had always maintained professional relationships with the police department, even leading the Commission on Improving Police-Community Relations last year. The light turned green, and Marcus continued his drive. The street was nearly empty now, and his headlights cut through the growing darkness. He was looking forward to getting home, heating up Sandra's dinner, and maybe catching the end of the basketball game before bed. Little did Marcus know that this routine drive home, one he had made thousands of times before, was about to become anything but ordinary. The police cruiser behind him was still following, and its lights were about to flash into life, setting in motion a chain of events that would change not only his life, but the entire community's perspective on law enforcement and racial justice. As Marcus later reflected, it was strange how the most significant moments in life often began on the most ordinary of evenings, when you least expected them. The red and blue lights suddenly flashed in Judge Henderson's rearview mirror, their harsh glow filling his car's interior. He checked his speedometer, 35 miles per hour in a 35 zone. Years of experience told him he hadn't made any traffic violations, but he knew exactly what to do in this situation. Officer James Barrett, a 34-year-old patrol officer with 8 years on the force, watched as the black Mercedes pulled over smoothly to the curb. He ran the license plate through his computer before stepping out. The registration showed the car belonged to someone named Henderson, but Barrett had already made assumptions about the driver. Marcus turned off his jazz music and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. He'd had this conversation with his own son too many times. Keep calm, be polite, but know your rights. Through his side mirror, he watched the officer approach, noting how the man's hand rested near his weapon. License and registration. Barrett barked before even reaching the window completely. No greeting, no explanation for the stop. His flashlight beam shot directly into Marcus's face, making him squint. "Good evening, officer," Marcus replied calmly, his deep voice steady. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Barrett's response came sharp and quick. "I said license and registration. We can discuss the reason after you comply with my orders." Marcus felt his heart rate increase slightly, but his face remained composed. 20 years on the bench had taught him how to maintain a calm exterior even in tense situations. "Officer, I understand you're doing your job, but I believe I have the right to know why I've been stopped." "Listen here." Barrett's voice grew harder, his southern accent becoming more pronounced with his rising anger. "I don't need to explain myself until you show me some ID. For all I know, this could be a stolen vehicle." The judge noticed how Barrett's body language had become increasingly aggressive. The flashlight beam hadn't moved from his face, and now a second hand had moved closer to the gun holster. Marcus could feel his own suit jacket becoming damp with sweat, despite the cool evening air. "Sir, step out of the vehicle," Barrett commanded, taking a step back and putting his hand fully on his weapon. Marcus's mind raced through his options. As a judge, he knew every detail of the law surrounding traffic stops. As a black man in America, he knew the danger of sudden movements. "Officer Barrett," he said, reading the nameplate on the uniform, "I want to cooperate, but I need you to understand that I'm going to move very slowly." "How do you know my name?" Barrett snapped, pulling his weapon halfway out of its holster. "Step out now." The situation was escalating dangerously. Marcus could see a young couple walking their dog on the other side of the street, watching the scene unfold. He thought of Sandra waiting at home, of his children, of the thousands of cases he presided over involving police encounters gone wrong. "I'm going to reach for my ID now," Marcus announced clearly, making each movement deliberate and slow. "It's in my left inner jacket pocket. I am a criminal court judge, and my credentials are with my driver's license." Barrett's flashlight beam finally wavered. "You expect me to believe that? Just get out of the car now." Marcus continued his slow movement, drawing out his wallet. His judicial badge caught the flashlight's beam as he opened it, the gold surface reflecting brightly. Barrett's eyes widened as he read the credentials. "The Honorable Marcus Henderson, Superior Court Judge." The atmosphere shifted instantly. Barrett's hand dropped from his weapon, and the flashlight beam finally lowered. The officer's face, previously twisted in aggression, now showed something between shock and fear. "Judge Henderson?" Barrett's voice had lost its edge, replaced by uncertainty. I didn't." "Yes, Officer Barrett," Marcus replied, his voice level but carrying the weight of his position. "Now, would you please explain why you pulled me over? And this time, I'm not asking as a civilian, but as the judge who chairs the Police Oversight Committee for this district." The night air grew thick with tension as both men realized this routine traffic stop had just become something much more significant. Behind them, more cars were slowing down to watch, their headlights illuminating a scene that would soon become the talk of the entire city. The silence that followed seemed to stretch for hours, though it was only seconds. Officer Barrett shifted his weight from one foot to another, his face now visible in the glow of approaching car headlights. Several vehicles had slowed down to observe the scene, their presence adding to the tension. "Sir, I mean, Your Honor," Barrett stammered, his earlier aggression replaced by nervous energy. "There was a report of a similar vehicle involved in suspicious activity in this area." Marcus Henderson's expression remained neutral, though his eyes narrowed slightly. After 15 years on the bench, he had developed a keen sense for detecting lies. Officer Barrett, I've been driving this route home from the courthouse for over a decade. What specific suspicious activity are you referring to? More cars were stopping now. Someone had started recording with their phone from across the street. Barrett noticed this too, his neck reddening under his collar. Well, you see. Barrett's hand unconsciously moved to adjust his body camera, which had been recording the entire encounter. There was a call about. About what exactly? Marcus pressed, his judicial tone emerging naturally. Because from where I sit, quite literally in this case, this appears to be a clear instance of racial profiling. Barrett's face flushed deeper. Sir, I resent that accusation. I'm just doing my job, following protocol. Let's review that protocol then, Marcus interrupted, his voice carrying the same authority it did in his courtroom. You followed my vehicle for approximately 6 blocks before initiating this stop. You approached with your hand on your weapon. You refused to state the reason for the stop, immediately demanded I exit the vehicle, and escalated to a show of force, all without probable cause. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk now. Someone whispered, "That's Judge Henderson." The name spread through the onlookers in hushed tones. Your Honor, if you'll just let me explain. Barrett started, but Marcus wasn't finished. Officer Barrett, I presided over hundreds of cases involving traffic stops. I've reviewed countless hours of body camera footage. I've seen good police work, and I've seen constitutional violations. Which category do you think this stop falls under? Barrett's radio crackled to life. Unit 247, status check. The gathering crowd had caught the attention of dispatch. Unit 247, situation under control. Barrett responded quickly, though his voice wavered slightly. He turned back to Marcus. Judge Henderson, I apologize if my approach seemed aggressive. Perhaps we could. Perhaps we could continue this discussion at the station, Marcus suggested firmly. I'd like to file a formal report, and I believe your body camera footage will be crucial evidence. Additionally, I'm curious about your traffic stop statistics for the past year. Barrett's face paled. He knew those statistics wouldn't paint a favorable picture. A police supervisor's car pulled up, lights flashing but no siren. Captain Sarah Rodriguez stepped out, immediately assessing the situation. She worked with Judge Henderson on several community initiatives and recognized him instantly. Judge Henderson, she called out, walking briskly toward them. Is everything all right here? Marcus turned slightly in his seat to address her. Captain Rodriguez, good evening. Officer Barrett and I were just discussing the importance of proper traffic stop procedures and constitutional rights. The captain's experienced eyes took in the scene, the nervous officer, the dignified judge, the gathering crowd with their phones, and the growing number of news cars pulling up. Someone had already called the local stations. Officer Barrett, Captain Rodriguez said sharply, return to your vehicle and wait for me there. As Barrett retreated, Marcus stepped out of his car, straightening his suit jacket. He stood tall, his presence commanding respect from everyone present. Sarah, he said quietly to the captain, this stops tonight. Not just for me, for every black person in this city who's been pulled over for suspicious activity or matching a description. Captain Rodriguez nodded solemnly. I understand, Your Honor. What would you like to do next? Marcus looked at the growing crowd, the recording phones, Officer Barrett sitting in his patrol car, and the arriving news vans. He knew this moment could either divide the community further or become a catalyst for real change. First, he said, we're going to make sure this incident is properly documented. Then, we're going to use it to make some long overdue changes in police training and accountability. The night air crackled with possibility as everyone present sensed they were witnessing something significant, a moment when justice wasn't just a word in a law book, but a real force for change in their community. The police station buzzed with unusual activity for 10:30 p.m. Word had spread quickly through the department that Judge Henderson was in the building, and the reason for his presence made everyone uncomfortable. Officers tried to look busy while stealing glances at the glass-walled conference room, where an emergency meeting was taking place. Inside the conference room, Judge Marcus Henderson sat at one end of the long table, his posture straight but relaxed. To his right sat Captain Rodriguez, and across from them, Officer Barrett seemed to shrink in his chair. Police Chief William Thompson, who had been called in from his home, completed the group. "Let's review the body camera footage," Chief Thompson suggested, his face grave as he pressed play on the large screen mounted on the wall. The footage started with Barrett's approach to the Mercedes. Everyone in the room watched in silence as the scene unfolded. Barrett's aggressive tone, his hand constantly near his weapon, the unnecessary escalation, it all looked even worse on video. Marcus noticed how Barrett winced at certain points, particularly when his own voice barked orders without cause. The young officer was seeing himself through others' eyes for the first time, and the reality was clearly disturbing him. "Officer Barrett," Marcus spoke after the video ended, his voice surprisingly gentle. "How many traffic stops have you made this month?" Barrett swallowed hard. 47, Your Honor." "And how many of those drivers were black?" The room grew still. Captain Rodriguez pulled up the statistics on her laptop. 39, she answered when Barrett hesitated. Chief Thompson rubbed his temples. In a city where black residents make up only 23% of the population. I didn't. Barrett struggled to find words. "I was just stopping suspicious vehicles." "Define suspicious," Marcus said, leaning forward slightly. "Because I drive a Mercedes, wear a suit, and was coming from the courthouse where I've worked for 15 years. What made my vehicle suspicious, Officer Barrett?" Sweat appeared on Barrett's forehead. "Sir, "The truth, please," Marcus insisted. "This isn't about destroying your career. It's about acknowledging the biases that influence our actions." Barrett looked down at his hands. I saw a black man in an expensive car in that neighborhood, and I just assumed." His voice trailed off. "You assumed what many have assumed before," Marcus completed the thought. "And that assumption could have turned deadly tonight." The room fell silent as the weight of those words sank in. Everyone present knew how differently the situation could have ended if Marcus hadn't been a judge. Chief Thompson cleared his throat. "Judge Henderson, what would you like us to do here?" Officer Barrett's actions clearly violated department policy. Marcus studied Barrett's face for a long moment. The officer looked younger now, almost vulnerable. "I see two paths forward," he finally said. "We could process this as a formal complaint, leading to disciplinary action, or—" He paused, and everyone leaned forward slightly. "Or we could use this incident as a catalyst for change. Officer Barrett, would you be willing to work with me on a new training program, to share your experience and help other officers recognize their own biases?" Barrett's head snapped up, surprise clear on his face. You'd want me to do that? After how I treated you?" "Sometimes," Marcus said, "the best teachers are those who've learned the hardest lessons." He turned to Chief Thompson. "With your permission, Chief, I'd like to develop a comprehensive training program, not just about racial profiling, but about the human cost of these encounters." Captain Rodriguez was already taking notes. "We could start with the patrol units, then expand to the entire force." "And regular ride-alongs with community leaders," Marcus added. "Real relationships break down prejudices better than any classroom training." Barrett sat straighter in his chair. "I want to help," he said quietly. "I need to make this right." Marcus nodded, a small smile appearing on his face. "Then let's get to work, because tonight wasn't just about one traffic stop. It's about making sure every encounter between law enforcement and citizens is based on facts, not fears." Outside the conference room, officers who had been pretending not to watch saw something unexpected. Judge Henderson and Officer Barrett shaking hands. It wasn't the ending anyone had expected when the night began, but it might just be the beginning their department needed. By morning, the video of Judge Henderson's traffic stop had gone viral. Cell phone footage from bystanders showed up on social media, and local news stations ran the story as their lead. The police department's phone started ringing nonstop at 6 a.m., with reporters seeking comments about what they were calling the judge and the officer. Marcus sat in his kitchen, watching the morning news coverage while Sandra made coffee. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing since he got home late last night. There were messages from their children, other judges, civil rights lawyers, and even the mayor. "You're trending on Twitter," Sandra said, placing a steaming cup in front of him. Her face showed concern mixed with pride. "Are you sure you want to handle this your way? People are angry. They want Officer Barrett fired." Marcus took a sip of coffee, thinking carefully before answering. "Firing one officer won't fix the system, Sandra. We need to change hearts and minds." Across town, Officer James Barrett sat alone in his small apartment, watching the same news coverage. His phone was also buzzing, but with very different messages. Some fellow officers called him a disgrace. Others warned him he'd ruined his career. His mother had called crying, asking how she'd raised a son who could act that way. The doorbell rang, making Barrett jump. He opened it to find Captain Rodriguez standing there. "Get dressed," she said firmly. "The chief wants to see everyone involved in last night's incident. There's a crowd gathering outside the station." When Barrett arrived at the station 30 minutes later, he had to walk through a group of protesters. Their signs read "Fire Barrett" and "Justice for Judge Henderson." Someone recognized him and started booing. Barrett hurried inside, his face burning with shame. In the chief's office, the atmosphere was tense. Chief Thompson looked like he hadn't slept, his tie slightly crooked. "The mayor's office is demanding action," he said, pacing behind his desk. "The video has over 1 million views already." "Where's Judge Henderson?" Barrett asked quietly. As if on cue, Marcus walked into the office, looking fresh and composed in a gray suit. The room fell silent. "Good morning," Marcus said, taking a seat. "I see we've got quite a situation on our hands." Chief Thompson nodded. "Judge, the mayor wants to make an example of this case. He's talking about a full investigation of our traffic stop practices." "Good," Marcus replied, surprising everyone. "That's exactly what we need. But first, Officer Barrett and I have an announcement to make." Barrett looked up, confused. They hadn't planned any announcement. "The press is waiting in the conference room," Marcus continued. "Officer Barrett and I are going to tell them about our new training initiative, about how this incident will help change police culture from the inside out. But the protesters," Barrett started. "We'll see two men choosing to work together instead of against each other," Marcus finished. He turned to Barrett. "Are you ready to face them?" Barrett stood straighter. "Yes, Your Honor, I am." The press conference room was packed. Cameras flashed as Marcus and Barrett walked in together. The reporters fell silent, pencils poised, waiting for drama. Instead, they got something unexpected. Judge Henderson spoke about transformation, not punishment. He talked about using this incident to create real change. When Barrett stepped up to speak, his voice shook at first but grew stronger. "I was wrong," he said clearly into the microphones. "My actions that night came from prejudices I didn't even realize I had. But Judge Henderson showed me something powerful, that we can turn mistakes into opportunities for growth." Outside, the protesters listened on their phones as the press conference was live-streamed. Slowly, the angry chants died down. Some people looked confused, others thoughtful. Back in the conference room, Marcus concluded the press conference with a powerful statement. "Today, we choose a different path, not one of division and anger, but of understanding and change. Officer Barrett and I invite every officer, every citizen, to join us in this work." As they left the podium, a young reporter called out, "Is this really enough? Can one traffic stop change anything?" Marcus turned back to the microphones. "One traffic stop? No. But one moment of honesty, one decision to do better, one step toward understanding. That's where all real change begins." The cameras kept flashing, capturing an image that would become famous. A black judge and a white officer walking together toward a new beginning. 2 weeks after the traffic stop incident, Judge Marcus Henderson's courtroom was unusually crowded. Instead of lawyers and defendants, the gallery was filled with police officers, community leaders, and civil rights activists. Officer James Barrett sat in the front row, looking both nervous and determined. "Welcome to the first session of the Bridge the Gap program," Marcus announced, standing before them not in his judicial robe, but in a regular suit. "Today, we begin something new in our city." The program had been Marcus's idea, developed during long discussions with Barrett, Chief Thompson, and community leaders. Its goal was simple but ambitious, to bring police officers face to face with the communities they served, in a setting where honest conversations could happen. "Officer Barrett," Marcus called out, "would you join me up here?" Barrett walked to the front, his uniform pressed perfectly. The other officers watched closely, some supportive, others skeptical. In the past 2 weeks, Barrett had become both the symbol of what was wrong with policing and what could be right about change. 2 weeks ago, Barrett began, his voice slightly shaky, I pulled over Judge Henderson because of assumptions I made based on his race. Today, I want to tell you what I've learned since then. The room grew quiet. Even the usual courthouse noise seemed to fade away. I always thought I was one of the good ones, Barrett continued. I told myself I was just doing my job, being vigilant. But when I watched my body camera footage, I saw something different. I saw fear in Judge Henderson's eyes. The same fear I probably put in hundreds of other innocent people's eyes. In the back of the room, Sandra Henderson wiped away a tear. She'd been hesitant about her husband's approach at first, but seeing this moment made her understand his vision. Marcus stepped forward again. This program isn't about shame or blame, it's about understanding. Every week, we'll pair officers with community members. They'll share meals together, attend family events, and really get to know each other as people. He gestured to a wall where photos were displayed. Pictures from the first community dinner held last week. Officers and residents sitting together, laughing, showing each other photos of their kids. But that's just the beginning, Marcus continued. We're also reviewing every traffic stop made in this city over the past year. The data will help us identify patterns and change policies. Captain Rodriguez stood up from her seat. We've already made changes to our training programs. Every new officer will spend time in community settings before ever making a traffic stop. And veterans like myself will be going through refresher courses. Barrett nodded. I've already started working with the training division. We're using my body camera footage as a teaching tool, showing what not to do, but also how to do better. From the middle of the room, a young black teenager raised his hand. Marcus recognized him from the youth program he mentored. Yes, Marcus Jr., the judge called on him. How do we know this will really change anything? The young man asked. How do we know we won't still get pulled over just for being black? Barrett stepped forward before Marcus could respond. That's a fair question. Change won't happen overnight. But every morning when I put on this uniform now, I ask myself one question. Am I serving my community, or am I serving my fears? Marcus smiled at the response. In 2 weeks, he watched Barrett transform from a defensive officer into someone willing to confront uncomfortable truths. Real change, Marcus addressed the room, happens person by person, conversation by conversation. It happens when we stop seeing uniforms and skin colors and start seeing human beings. He picked up a stack of papers from his bench. On these sheets are partner assignments. Each officer will be paired with a community member. Over the next 6 months, you'll get to know each other's families, share meals, attend events together. As the papers were passed out, there was a mix of nervousness and excitement in the room. Old barriers were about to come down. Remember, Marcus concluded, what happened 2 weeks ago could have ended very differently. Instead, we chose to turn a moment of confrontation into an opportunity for change. Now it's up to all of us to make that change real. The room burst into applause, and for the first time in 2 weeks, Barrett smiled a real smile. Something new was beginning in their city, and he was part of it. The community center was packed on a warm Saturday afternoon. Colorful banners hung from the walls announcing Bridge the Gap program, 6-month celebration. Children ran around wearing both plastic police badges and community leader stickers, while adults mingled, sharing stories and laughter. Judge Marcus Henderson stood near the entrance, watching Officer James Barrett play basketball with a group of teenagers. 6 months ago, these same teens would have walked away if they saw a police officer approaching. Now they were arguing playfully with Barrett about who had the better jump shot. Quite a change, isn't it? Sandra said, appearing beside her husband with 2 cups of lemonade. She handed one to Marcus, her eyes twinkling with pride. More than I ever hoped for, Marcus replied, taking a sip. The statistics paper in his pocket showed just how much had changed. Traffic stops were down 40%, complaints against officers had dropped by 60%, and community trust ratings had reached their highest level in 10 years. Across the room, Captain Rodriguez was showing photos on her phone to a group of community mothers. They were pictures from last week's police academy graduation, where new officers had received their badges from community members instead of department officials, a new tradition started by the program. Judge Henderson called out a familiar voice. Marcus turned to see Marcus Jr., the teenager who had asked the challenging question 6 months ago. The young man was now wearing a Youth Ambassador t-shirt and had a clipboard in his hand. "How are the surveys going?" Marcus asked, noting how much more confident the young man looked these days. "Amazing. 92% of people say they feel safer in their neighborhood now. And check this out." He flipped through his papers excitedly. 8 of our youth members want to become police officers. Barrett walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead after the basketball game. "Those kids are too fast for me now," he laughed. He'd lost weight over the past months, and the constant tension that used to show in his face was gone. "Officer Barrett," Marcus Jr. nodded respectfully. Their relationship had evolved from distrust to genuine respect through the program's mentoring sessions. A local news crew was setting up their camera in the corner. They'd been following the program's progress since that first traffic stop went viral. Today, they were here to document the results. Chief Thompson gathered everyone around for the interview. The reporter, Lisa Chen, had been skeptical at first, but even she had become a believer in the program's impact. "Officer Barrett," Lisa began, "6 months ago, you were at the center of a controversial traffic stop. Today, you're helping lead one of the most successful police community programs in the country. What changed?" Barrett looked at Judge Henderson before answering. "Everything changed," he said honestly. "I learned to see people instead of stereotypes. I learned that being a good police officer means being part of the community, not just patrolling it." Lisa turned to Marcus. "Judge Henderson, you could have pressed charges, demanded Officer Barrett's badge. Why did you choose this path instead?" Marcus smiled. "Because firing one officer wouldn't change the system. But changing one heart, that can start a revolution." The children had stopped playing to listen. Parents pulled them close, wanting them to remember this moment. "Our city isn't perfect," Marcus continued. "We still have work to do. But now we do that work together. Every traffic stop now begins with 'How can I help?' instead of 'Show me your ID.' Every interaction is an opportunity to build trust." Barrett nodded. "Last week, I pulled over a young black man in an expensive car. But instead of assuming the worst, I approached with respect. Turned out he was a doctor, rushing to the hospital for an emergency. 6 months ago, that could have gone very differently." The reporter looked around the room, at officers and community members sharing food, stories, and genuine friendship. "And what's next for the program?" Marcus beamed with pride. 5 other cities have already asked to implement our model. Next month, Officer Barrett and I start training their departments. But more importantly," he gestured to the room full of people, "this isn't just a program anymore. It's become who we are as a community." As if to prove his point, someone turned up the music and people started dancing. Officers, community members, children, and adults, all together. The news crew kept filming, capturing what real change looks like, not in grand gestures, but in simple moments of human connection. The grand ballroom of the City Convention Center sparkled with lights as people filed in for the Bridge the Gap program's 1-year anniversary celebration. Local leaders, police officers, community members, and representatives from 20 different cities across the country had gathered to witness what began with one tense traffic stop and grew into a national movement. Judge Marcus Henderson stood at the podium, looking out at the diverse crowd of over 500 people. Next to him stood Officer James Barrett, now promoted to sergeant and head of the department's Community Relations Division. They had just finished showing the dashcam video of that fateful night, not to shame anyone, but to remind everyone how far they'd come. 1 year ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying through the silent room. "I was just a judge driving home from work. Sergeant Barrett was just an officer doing what he thought was his job. We could have become another tragic headline, another example of what divides us. Instead, we chose a different path." Barrett stepped forward to share the microphone. "The numbers tell our story," he said, pointing to the large screen behind them. "Traffic stops down by 65% citywide. Complaints against officers reduced by 80%. Community trust ratings up by 90%, but the real story isn't in these numbers." He gestured to a table near the front where Marcus Jr. sat with other youth leaders. "It's in the faces of young people who no longer fear the police. It's in the 40 new officers who graduated from our academy last month, half of them from our own community programs. Sandra Henderson wiped away tears as she watched her husband and Barrett present together. She remembered how angry she'd been that night 1 year ago. Now she hosted monthly dinners for officers and their families at their home. Chief Thompson stood up next. When Judge Henderson and Sergeant Barrett first proposed this program, I thought they were dreamers. Maybe they were, but sometimes dreams are exactly what we need to change reality. The screen behind them showed photos from the past year: community picnics, joint training sessions, ride-alongs, youth programs, and countless moments of everyday interaction between police and citizens. Marcus Jr. approached the podium, now wearing a police cadet uniform. "A year ago, I asked how we could trust things would really change," he said, his voice confident. "Today, I'm training to become part of that change, and I'm not alone." The spotlight moved to a group of 20 young people, all program participants now entering law enforcement or legal careers. Captain Rodriguez took the microphone next. "We've had visitors from 52 cities this year, all wanting to learn from our program. 38 have already started implementing similar initiatives. This isn't just about our city anymore. It's about changing how we think about policing across America." Barrett returned to the podium, looking more relaxed and authentic than ever before. "People asked me if it was hard to admit my mistakes, to change my way of thinking. The truth is, the hardest part was facing who I used to be. The easy part was becoming who I am now." Marcus placed a hand on Barrett's shoulder. "Change isn't just about programs and policies," he said. "It's about people willing to see each other as human beings. It's about turning moments of conflict into opportunities for connection." The room burst into applause as photos appeared on the screen. Barrett and Marcus speaking at police academies across the country, conducting training sessions, appearing on national news shows, and most importantly, working with families in their own community. "We're not finished," Marcus concluded. "We've just begun. Every city that adopts this program adds their own ideas, their own improvements. What started with one traffic stop has become a blueprint for change." As music began to play, officers and community members moved to the dance floor together. Marcus watched as Barrett taught some young cadets his terrible dance moves, making everyone laugh. Sandra came up beside him. "Did you ever imagine that night would lead to all this?" she asked softly. Marcus smiled, watching the room full of people who had become more than participants in a program. They had become a family. "Sometimes," he said, "the worst moments can lead us to the best changes. We just have to be brave enough to take that first step." The celebration continued into the night, but it wasn't just a party. It was a testament to what happens when people choose understanding over anger, growth over blame, and hope over fear.